food doesn't give us any kind of long-term support, right? Food really ends up working like a short-term loan, actually, where you feel better for a moment, but the underlying stress is still there, right? Truly. Because I know this too. It's like really only the first and second bite of food when you're trying to use it for relaxation or comfort is good, right? After that, it's kind of like diminishing returns. And whatever we felt before we turned to the food is still there. And now what's layered on top of that is guilt, perhaps, a feeling of judging ourselves or bullying ourselves, negative self-talk. And, it ends up being kind of like an icky feeling. And sometimes the reason that the loop even happens to begin with, it's not even just about you, but it becomes kind of this communal thing with the people around you. Because we don't, like, during times of global stress, we don't just cope in isolation, right? So the loop isn't even something that it's just, like we said earlier, it's not just about you, it's about the environment around you. And it might not even be just your immediate environment. Because think about it. During the pandemic, for example, you couldn't open up social media app without seeing banana bread, sourdough, quarantine snacks, right? So it's like we are wired to mirror what we see. And so when the whole world is collectively leaning on food for comfort, it stops feeling like an individual thing and it starts feeling like a shared ritual. So it stops, it really does. It stops it, and that kind of makes it easier to have it go on for as long as it does and not realize that it's a problem. Because a shared ritual makes it harder to notice when something shifts from occasional comfort to constant reliance, right? And that's something really, really, really important. And it brings me to something that I see all the time in the mentorship with the women I work with, because when the big picture feels out of your hands, and the big picture can be, there's some universal big picture things, but there are some, big picture things that are more, that feel more pertinent to you as an individual, right? So whether it's politics or the economy, the state of the planet, your brain searches for smaller areas where you can feel in charge. Because like the brain hates nothing more than feeling out of control, right? Until we train it and rewire it to allow a feeling of discomfort, to train it to train our brains and our nervous system to where actually letting go is a default mechanism that feels self-serving and supportive. That rewiring is a training that takes time. But when we are in that search for control, food is one of the arenas, right? Where we kind of go to execute control, right? For some people, that looks like tightening the reins with rigid rules, right? That's control. But for others, it's quite the opposite, right? It's intentionally breaking all the rules as a way to push back. And for some, it's both, right? From a lot of the women I work with, it's both, right? It's a consistent cycle of, emotional overeating, then getting tired of our own bullshit. So we just kind of like go with the rigid rules, and that's good for a couple of weeks or months or something. And then, like we said, the global crisis or something triggers us, and we're back. We can't deal with the rigidity. So we kind of break our rigidity and then feel like a failure and hit the rock bottom and the rock bottom launch pad that I've spoken about in some of my other episodes. But at the end of the day, both of these sides of the coin, both responses are actually doing the same thing. They're trying to reclaim agency in a world that feels unpredictable and unsafe, right? And unreliable. And the unpredictability has another effect that actually goes even deeper. Because global stress doesn't just create new anxiety, it can reopen old and generationally inherited anxiety. Okay, so we know from research that our cells can carry the generational trauma of generations before us. Right? This is what we're learning now in epigenetics, and we're seeing it in diseases, and we're seeing it with mental health and addiction and all these different things. So when we are living in this kind of global stress zeitgeist times, or when there is global stress, it's not just the stress of now, it's the stress of old, right? Because a recession or an unstable financial time in the world or an unstable economy might remind you of the financial instability that you maybe grew up with, right? Or you might even be feeling anxiety. You're not even sure where it's coming from, but it was your ancestors' anxiety that's now being awakened in your cells because of the connectivity and, the epigenetics of, what we're now understanding, that there are brains in our cells that carry old wounds, right? A public health crisis might bring back memories of a time, where you felt isolated or powerless. I know so many people that, public health crisis where we're forced to, isolate ourselves or have really just, have very different reactions from different people. And people had a lot of reactions to that surprised them because they didn't know that they'd feel that way until it happened. They didn't know they'd react a certain way to isolation or powerlessness because it just was so not a way that their personality had ever reacted before. But, the public health crisis kind of triggered something within them that maybe they were just discovering about themselves, right? So when old experiences get stirred up, the urge to self-soothe can feel massive. And not, like I said, not just because of today's uncertainty, but because it's echoing everything your body remembers from before and the generations before you too.